You've landed on The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us here every other week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, saying welcome back. We love having you, and if you're new here at The Substance, we like to have conversation with folks who are engaging in goodness, truth, and beauty in various fields. Previous guests include folks like author and podcaster Caitlin Chess, author Kevin Nye, Dr. Karen Swallow-Prior, Jamar Tisby, and multi-hyphenate artist Propaganda. And today, we are having on a return guest that is just a delight. I went back to check the various messages and DMs and tweets and all that. Back in 2021, former guest, friend of the show, Dr. Karen Swallow-Prior, put one of Courtney's previous books on our radar. So we reached out to her. We did one of the early episodes on a previous book of hers and just kind of stayed connected ever since. And she has a new book for those of you who have the video. It is and we talk about this. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous looking book. Like if I didn't know Courtney, frankly, even if I wasn't a person of faith and I didn't know the publisher, if I just saw this book on a shelf, I would pick it up and take a look at it. The IVP cover design team, once again, knocked it out of the park. Her new book, Looking Up, A Birder's Guide to Hope Through Grief. It's a really wonderful book. I haven't finished it yet. Wonderful book, beautiful cover. Happy to have Courtney back on. And we cover just a whole gamut of stuff. Family, faith, a lot of bird talk. She has successfully got me on her birder app. I'm recording this intro a little while after our conversation, and she did successfully sell me on the Merlin bird app. I was interacting with some of our listeners on Instagram, and it sounds like some of you guys enjoy that as well. It's a lot of fun. My boys especially really like the feature where you can turn on the microphone. It is kind of like a Shazam for birds. If you hear birds tweeting or calling or singing to each other, press the button and it tells you all the birds that are in your vicinity. And then you can kind of look for them. It's pretty cool. Check out the new book and check out her podcast, The Thing with Feathers. It's just such a gentle, delightful listen. If you're looking for something fresh or something new, or if you're looking for just a wonderful listen while you're taking a walk, if you're walking your dog, getting a little bit of light exercise, doing chores around the house, her podcast is just wonderful. It might get you to download the Bird app, but it is just really wonderful, substantive, gentle conversations about a wide variety of topics, with the anchor being birds. Sometimes they get super deep and spiritual and philosophical, and sometimes it's just a really pleasant conversation about people who share a hobby that I don't know if I need any other hobbies in my life right now, but that I'm creeping up on. There is a lot of relaxation and delight in it. So who knows here in the next 6 months if I go all out on the birding thing. The jury's out on that, I guess. We'll see. Checking in a few months on that. This was great, and I hope you guys all enjoy. So without further ado, here is Courtney. Courtney, it's so good to have you back on The Substance. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. It always feels special to be a repeat guest because it means I didn't totally bomb the first time.
Yeah, right? I'm trying to remember. You were on it was Happy Now was the last time you were on. And I feel like it was maybe KSP or somebody put you on my radar, because there's so many authors who I absolutely want to promote, and like the struggling artist grind is very much a grind. And I always want to try to promote people, but people message me all the time. Hey, like my friend wrote a book, put him on your show, da 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 da. And I was like, I'm pretty sure KSP in some ways like, hey, I think you would like Courtney, and had a great conversation and been following you ever since. And this is a very unique project in that it's part memoir, but I mean, a lot of your books cover very personal topics, but the birding aspect of it has become a very significant part of your life, kind of at a certain point in time. It's not just like a general deal.
Yeah, birds came into my life during the start of COVID, And the surprising thing to me about the birds was they had always been there. I just hadn't been paying any attention. So what started as noticing turned quickly into enthusiasm and then borderline obsession. And I'm now a hardcore birder, much to my husband's chagrin. He's like, "You are not like this when I married you." But it has just been such a practice of delight. It's done wonders for my prayer life, and the birds have always been there. So the more I notice, the more delight I encounter.
I've been flirting with it for a long time, and following your feed, listening to the podcast every now and then in the book is really kind of, I have not quite dove into the deep end yet, but I mean, last year, and this wasn't even me, my wife is kind of interested in it too. We got a bunch of feeders. It's fun. It's great.
It is. I always tell people, don't say I'm not a birder. Just say I'm not a birder yet. If you live long enough, birding comes for all of us.
I mean, I kind of think it does. So before we get into the birding, there was one question I kind of wanted to start with. So a number of times, both in the foreword, which was beautifully written by Kay Warren, and then in the first chapter, beverages came up a few times. So I need to ask, coffee or tea in the Ellis house? What's the coffee versus tea dichotomy there?
Phil, we are a house divided, and maybe you can just pray for us, because my husband is the coffee guy and I am the tea girl, and never the two shall meet, in part because I've had some issues with my voice. It's really fun. You turn 40 and it's like all the lights on your car's dashboard start blinking at once, and like anything that can go wrong can go wrong. And so I've had enough issues with my voice that the doctor said I had to cut out caffeine. So not even just tea, but decaf tea.
Well, yeah,
so
a lot of teas
really
are
officially
caffeinated.
old now. Yeah. Yep. Barry's decaf breakfast tea. That is my jam. And Daryl drinks good coffee, and we still manage to get along pretty well most of the time.
I mean, I enjoy both. I'm definitely more of a coffee guy, but was reading in the intro or the foreword, Kay's very lovingly talking about all your times over tea together. And then you mentioned coffee, and I was like, I need to ask her about that, because I feel like it is a funny thing in like not quite middle age, but like in our 30s and 40s, like, I feel like a lot of people have to pick a side in the tea coffee. I am genuinely a big fan of them both, but maybe biologically at some point I'll have to switch over.
It's hard. You just, your body starts to react to different things in different ways. I think of that scene from the sitcom The Office where Daryl Philbin is like, my body developed a soy allergy at 35. Who develops a soy allergy at 35? And I was like, solidarity, buddy. I got to drink tea now. It happens.
Yeah. Well, I do like tea very much, and my body doesn't really respond to caffeine as much as I would like it to. I don't know if I have just obliterated it with caffeine and energy drinks like back in my 20s, but like I love coffee, but I can drink a cup and a half of coffee at night and go to sleep excellently. My wife has a Diet Coke after like 2:00 and she's up all night.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to the point where you kind of have to game the system. You're like, okay, This is not ideal, but I know I can handle it, or this is different than it used to be. But yeah, Kay and I drink a lot of tea together, and she just pulls from such a deep well of wisdom, and she's a birder. And, I'm not going to argue that those two things aren't connected. So.
Excellent. So the very first thing book-wise, Courtney, this is a gorgeous book. We get a lot of books here at The Substance, and I buy a lot of books myself. I go to the library a lot, check out a lot of books. Like, this is a book that if I knew nothing about you, if I knew nothing about the publisher I saw it, I would at least pick it up and be like, what is this? Like, this is really interesting. This was the IVP team knocked it out of the park. Like, they're always good. They're usually very good. This is an incredible cover.
It's such a beautiful book. And I didn't know before writing books that you don't have that much input into your cover. You have to hope that the team kind of gets it. And they sent me this cover and I just gasped. I was like, they get it. They read it. They understood it. And a good cover, I think, makes the book even better. It says things that the book didn't say in a visual way. And I just love it so much. They did a fabulous job.
Well, I mean, it gives you a feeling right away before you even open the book. Like, it's warm, it's vibrant, it's lush. Like, this is quite a cover. And like, their design team is great. I'm regularly remarking whenever they send us the catalog, I'm like, oh, these are great. But I remember when you posted it on either Twitter or Instagram, when I first saw it, I was like, wow, like, this is This is incredible.
They did such a phenomenal job. And you never know when you get that email of here's your cover. And they usually send you one or two options what you're going to see in that email. I was kind of holding my breath. And then the big reveal, and I was able to show it to Daryl, my husband, and to some friends, and they were immediately like, "Oh my goodness, that is just amazing!" And the artist, David Fawcett, who does most of the
David Fawcett
covers, yeah. So shout out to David Fawcett.
Yeah,
he's got some skills. Talented guy.
This is incredible. Well, I'm sure we will get to your grandfathers because that's a very important part of the book. But I always like to ask authors about their introductions. Tell me about Anna Woofenden and why this particular book was dedicated to her.
Anna is one of my dearest friends. She is an Episcopal priest out in Massachusetts, and I'm a Presbyterian minister out here in California. So we're bi-coastal pastoring, and she has been a person who, since about 5 years ago when we first became friends through a writing group, has walked with me through some of the biggest highs and lows of my life with such grace and wisdom. And I'm just so grateful for that voice in my life, because as a pastor, you still need people to pastor you. But you also need friends for whom you're not their pastor. And so that unique place of her voice in my life has meant the world. So I in the little dedication, I write that she's a wren of a friend. And when you read the book, there's a whole chapter on wrens and how they work together and how they sing songs. Two wrens can sing a song that sounds like a single bird because of the ways their voices interweave. And that's how I think of our friendship, is we sing a better song because we are in friendship with one another.
Well, that's great. And I mean, the older I get, I've always kind of understood that with just the relationships I've had with my pastors and training in seminary and things like that. But pastors needing pastors, I feel like, is not something that is talked about enough. And usually, in my experience, it's almost never talked about until like you're in a catastrophe and it's like, man, pastors need pastors. Like, it's not usually preventative maintenance, or not even it's not just like a part of like normal health.
Totally. And what I appreciate most about Anna is 95% of the time we're just being friends. You know, we're colleagues, we're peers, but there are those moments where she'll say, "I'm going to pastor you a little bit. Is that okay?" And I'm like, "Yes, bring it on. I need it." And I'll do the same for her. So it's really lovely. I'm a pastor. I'm married to a pastor. Daryl's a pastor. But sometimes you just need that outside voice who's not right in the middle of your congregation and your current problems to speak some words of truth. So she's a gem.
So your interest in birding started in 2020, right? Or when you really jumped off on it. So not the chillest time in the world. A lot going on. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on, because I mean, a lot of people got into that, right?
Yeah, the statistics are pretty incredible, actually. Many birdwatching websites and sales of bird feeders and bird seed all increased by 50% or more. The Merlin Bird ID app, which I'm an evangelist for three things in this life: my favorite donut place, Jesus, and the Merlin Bird ID app, which is free. It helps you identify birds, but the downloads of that went up exponentially because people were looking out their windows for the first time. And one of the things we could all do that in a time when we could do very little was go on walks. And when you go on walks, you start to notice things. And one of the easiest things to notice are the birds.
Yeah, no, I'll probably be downloading soon. I'm like, oh, do I have time for another thing? But I was like, Courtney's talked about it enough. I think I'm probably going to jump. But so I asked that to say, set that up for 2020. It was a very hectic, uncertain. It's uncertain personally. And for you and your husband, pastors, people are looking to you guys. You have people in your congregation who are at risk, going through various things. You had a number of folks pass in your congregation too, right? I mean, there was a lot going on. And then now when your book comes out, 2024, very we're ramping up to a very contentious election year. You see churches having meltdowns. You see every other week there's a documentary coming out, which in a lot of ways, I think that's good, shining light on a darkness. But you see all this rough stuff. What do you think it is about birding, or what are your hopes for this book too, to kind of be a balm, be a bit of light and hope in very challenging times?
Yeah, it was a really brutal season in 2020. And I think there are echoes of that season now as we head into the exact same election in many ways
So
that
stupid.
we've already had. And I think one of the best things about birding is that it really does tether you to what's right in front of you. So it's so easy to spin out and you pull up the news, and we're not wired to be able to manage psychologically that there's a crisis in Ukraine and there's a crisis in Gaza and there's a crisis in Sudan and there's a crisis in Colombia. And, it is really, really good to deeply care and pray over what God sets before us, but it's likely not the entire planet because we can't hold that. And
Yeah.
birds really ground us in the immediacy of what's right in front of us. The birds move around a lot. They don't stay still for very long by and large. And so when you're gifted this beautiful feathered thing that's right in front of you, it is an opportunity to be there in that moment. And that's done wonders for my spiritual life. It's done wonders for my prayer life. I'm a really antsy person. I like to be on the move. So that whole be still and know that I am God is very hard for me. But if I'm being still and actively looking and actively waiting and actively expecting to see something beautiful, it allows me to quiet my soul. And I think the other beautiful thing about birding is birds are the great unifier. Birds don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Birds don't care who you voted for in the last election. And we can get so contentious over finer points of theology, over our politics, over, in COVID, it was mask mandates and social distancing. Is your church closed or is it open? How do you do all these things? And people at their absolute worst, people are indifferent to birds. Nobody really hates birds. They're a thing we can enjoy together. I go on these birding outings, these birding tours with people who are wearing t-shirts with slogans that I find personally very offensive, but we can agree on the osprey. And in that moment of shared humanity, that small bridge that we've built together, good things happen. So birds are a great unifier. Birds are a great way to still ourselves. And as the world heats up, as the world ramps up, we are in need even more of those spiritual practices that help us to be still.
Oh, that is good. I mean, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I mean, have you built, like you said, have you been able to build bridges and build relationships with people where your paths wouldn't otherwise cross if it weren't for the hobby?
For sure. That's one of the things I love. I do a little birding hobby podcast called The Thing with Feathers, and I interview people of faith who are hobby birders, and I'm finding all these people of faith. Kay Warren is
which
a birder.
I'll say is
Fernando
very
Ortega
good.
is a birder.
Genuinely, a lot of people show me their podcast. Courtney's podcast is genuinely a delight. It's an easy listen. It's a very gentle show. If you're looking for something to do while you're running on the treadmill or doing dishes, it's an excellent show.
That means a lot coming from you because you know a thing or two about a good podcast. But I have professional ornithologists on the show, and I have ecologists, and they fill out a little form, a little questionnaire before they come on the show so I can craft really thoughtful questions. And one of the things I ask is, would you like to talk about faith? I'm a Presbyterian pastor. We don't have to, but if you want to, we can. And many people will say, absolutely not. Birds are my faith. But then we have this delightful conversation and they know that I'm a pastor. And often when we sign off the recording portion, they'll say, thank you. I kind of expected a bait and switch. I expected you to try to pressure me into some weird faith thing. I don't know many Christians who are interested in birds. And so to bring these two worlds together and
when you say you're a Christian person with a podcast, it's usually that's exactly. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but to be able to say, I care about the birds in part because of my faith, because I believe my faith calls me to care for creation, because I think my faith calls me to care about you, whether or not you share my faith. It's been really amazing to just those small, simple conversations. I have a lot of friends in the birding world who would consider themselves atheist or agnostic or even hostile to the things of faith, but we find this shared love in birds, and that has opened up a wonderful well of conversation where at least they've met one Christian who's not a jerk and not a stereotype like they see in the media, because they've all had some run-ins. So that has been a great side effect, I guess, of the podcast, a silver lining to the work I love to do anyway.
No, that is great. And I mean, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about from both the book and the podcast is just the idea of natural theology. I mean, I grew up in a very conservative evangelical community where it wasn't quite, and maybe there probably was suspicion, we just never talked about it, but it was definitely the idea of when people get too into nature, like that's weird or suspect, and like, oh, like it was usually very kind of joking, but it was, the idea was we meet God in the text and we meet God in the sanctuary. And it's like, well, God made the whole world. The Bible a lot talks about all these different aspects that declare his glory. So why not? So, I mean, talk to me about how like your history with natural theology, kind of how maybe where you were, where you are, how you guys discipling your kids in that manner.
I have a very similar church background to yours, and I'm grateful for it in that I know the Bible really, really well. A lot of my fellow seminary students were just sweating over the Bible content exam, and I'm like, I learned this in Awana. Like, I got this.
For sure.
I'm gonna struggle with the Hebrew exam, but I'm gonna do great at the Bible content.
I was crushing short sword drills when I was like 6. Like,
right, 1,000%. And I'm so grateful for that. But like you said, they struggled with the book of nature. And it was almost like, if you love nature too much, it's one step away from being a Wiccan, or it's one step away from, going down this dark path. And the more I read the church mothers and fathers, they had a deep appreciation for the book of nature. Augustine writes about it. Thomas Aquinas writes about it. Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, they had this understanding that, yes, we find God in the text and we find God in the worship space, but also a robin has things to teach us, and a storm has things to teach us, and a tree has things to teach us. And the fear that I was taught growing up was, you will begin to worship the things themselves. And I have not found that to be anywhere near the case, because what happens when I see these beautiful birds in nature, when I see, even the carnage of nature, we had a Cooper's hawk tearing apart a mockingbird in our backyard, and the kids were like, woo. I am drawn to prayer. I am drawn to worship, not of the Cooper's hawk and its power, and not of the mockingbird and its tragedy, but of the God who has spun it all into being. So I found exactly the opposite, that the more time I spend in the natural world, the more attention I pay, the deeper I go, because there is always something more to discover. There's always something more to learn. The yard looks different day to day. It brings me to my knees in a way that scripture does too, but in a different form. There is something about the delight and the awe and the wonder that is so seamlessly encountered in nature, that really is a gift. It's something a child can easily appreciate. It's something that comes to us in different forms in different seasons. And I think that distance between sight and delight is so short in nature. And it takes parsing in scripture. It takes understanding and context. And it means sometimes we get to a deeper place of delight. But that delight we find in nature is so simple and easily available. And what a gift. And I'd been missing out for so long.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of folks who are raised in similar things where there's a lot of fear that drives things. Like the parameters are drawn by fear. Because, it would be bad to worship nature. But I mean, do many people really actually do that? Like, even the people who highly revere nature, there's usually some sort of concept of a divine and a creator and somebody that somewhere where your gratitude goes to for the blessings of nature. And then you also see on the flip side, a lot of the folks who love their theology, which that's very good to like know what you believe and things like that. You can see a lot of them tend to maybe like worshiping their theology to the point where it's not interested in being circumspect or doing the Berean thing or really being open in any way to like reassessing personal dogma.
Yes, agreed. And I think the question at the heart of it all is, are your spiritual practices making you more like Jesus, who describes himself as gentle and lowly in heart, who describes himself as meek and mild, who is a friend of sinners, who welcomed children? Or are they making you harder and more combative? Because that's a problem. And that's one of the overlaps I find with a lot of these folks who do not consider themselves people of faith, is they are by and large gentle, thoughtful, interesting people. And I think they're very close to the kingdom, whether they know it or not. And there are opportunities there to share those little seeds of faith in ways that are gentle and approachable, and that can be heard in a unique way in that environment. So that's part of what I try to do.
So you said you have 3 kids, 5 to 11, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are any of them responding? Who's your biggest birder, and kind of how have they responded to mom's new hobby over the last few years?
Yeah, they're great with it. They all are interested in birds, but in different ways. Our oldest kid is really into superlatives. He wants the biggest and the fastest. So he's really into
Nice.
peregrine falcons. Yeah, he likes the big, strong, fast birds.
My boy loves, and I don't know if I knew this before, just forgot it, but he was schooling me like, he's like raptors. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then I learned that, oh, like that's like a class or a family or whatever, a bird, like birds of prey are based. I was like, oh man, my little kid's teaching me. He watches Wild Kratts a lot, and he's teaching me.
We love the Wild Kratts. Wild Kratts are the best. Our middle kid, who's just about to turn 8, he is our detail kid. He notices details. I mean, he's the kid who, when he was 2 years old, would be like, "Look, Mom, it's a front end loader." And I'm looking, and the thing is, it's like smaller than my thumb. It's 300 yards away, but he always notices details. So he is the kid who finds bugs in the backyard and is interested in birds because he's interested in everything. And then our youngest loves all the common birds. And the thing I've learned from her, she's 5 years old, is that a common bird is not a common bird. And the fact that she gets overjoyed with every crow, with every mourning dove, with every grackle in the grocery store parking lot is reminding me that it's not just about the rare birds or the most beautiful birds or the shiny birds, but every bird is a gift. So she is our kid who will run screaming into the house like, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, there's a bird in the front yard." And it's the crow that's been in the front yard all day. But it helps me to see them with new eyes. So I am hopeful that I'm raising 3 birders. I'm doing everything I can. I leave all sorts of birding books all over the house, open interesting pages. I'm doing the Lord's work, Phil. I'm trying.
That's beautiful. I love the wonder, like having a kid like that, infectious like wonder when they're like, whoa, like this thing. You're like, yeah, that thing. That's a very normal, common thing. But then you're like, no, actually, like that is interesting, or that's beautiful, or that's important or valuable. And having kids either in your home or in your community, Jesus talked a lot about being childlike, the value of children, like treating children with like a high, like holding them in high regard and treating them with respect. Like children are very wondrous and very helpful in some of those things.
They are. And those reminders are so good for me as a parent, because when she runs in and wants to show me the crow, my gut reaction is always that what I'm doing in that moment is the most important thing. But sometimes what I'm doing is scrolling Twitter or washing a dish that's going to be there in 5 minutes. So why is that my impulse? And to work against that and recapture that childhood wonder. Kids are a gift that way.
I hear a lot of specific names of animals in my house just because my oldest loves the Wild Kratts. And as I opened your book, it was great. We didn't get the advanced reader copy. We got the final book. It's beautiful. Your blurbs at the front, fantastic. You want to tell me and tell the audience kind of how you got that past the editor? Like, what was the pitch? You have a couple of endorsements here from various birds in the front of your book, and I thought that was delightful. And I read them to my son, and he goes, "What?" And I was like, "No, but like this is a joke." But he loved that. I thought that was hysterical. What was the impetus of that?
The pitch to the publisher was, I know the book is about grief, but it's a little bit whimsical too. What would you think about this? And I sent them some examples that I had written, and they were like, "These are great. You can pick 3. And so what I did actually was I went to Twitter, which I'm still calling Twitter, the birdiest of the platforms. And I said to my Twitter friends, like, "Hey, anyone want to come up with a fake bird endorsement for my book? If we use yours, I'll name you in the acknowledgments." And so actually all 3 of them that are in there were not written by me. They were written by Corey George, Susan Baller-Shepard, and Leah Dean Thomas. And so in addition to all the wonderful endorsements that fellow writers and pastors gave to me, which is, it's always such a labor of love to give an endorsement because you're reading a book, you're not getting paid for this. You have to read a person's book and then say something nice about it. But in addition to folks like Patsy Claremont and Keith Gregoire, the pileated woodpecker says, "I was banging my head against a wall until I read this book." And then there are 2 more. We've got a great horned owl and a grackle, but people have to read the book to find those.
Yeah, no, that was great. Previous guest shout out. We have Emily Hunter McGowan and Karen Swallow Pryor in there, as well as some of these birds. And I was like, and they're very clever too. That makes sense. Crowdsourcing those on Twitter. That's That's a good move right there, because you get clever people. It's a birdie like Twitter, but it's also a very clever platform. Well, that was the idea. The people who are still on it, every now and then I'll see a reason why I'm like, okay, I'll stay for a little bit longer.
Totally.
Those are hilarious. That's great. And yeah, for dealing with grief is a very strong theme in the book. That was a very nice way to kind of a little sugarcoat the medicine at the beginning on the front end there. So,
absolutely. I'm a big believer that if people are going to listen, they need to laugh a little too. That's how I preach. That's how I write.
So tell me a little bit, and tell us, because I read a lot of it. What was the role of your grandfather back when you were young and now, kind of in your faith and in your birding journey?
So we grew up, my parents, and I have two younger sisters, and my childhood was about 45 minutes away from where my maternal grandparents lived. And so we saw them almost every week, and they would bring over donuts, or we'd go to their house and they'd make us dinner. And they lived on a lake. They had a little canoe and a paddle boat. And my grandfather was a person of very few words. He would make Calvin Coolidge look chatty. But he loved nature and he loved animals. And so that was one of the reliable ways that he and I could connect. And I spent most of my childhood kind of avoiding nature. I was very indoorsy. That's where the books were. That's where I wanted to be. But he always had kind of this pull, like, look what's going on outside. Look what's at the bird feeders. Look what we saw in the yard. Look at the trees that I planted. And so, I grew up with that close relationship with him, and then I moved away, and the book begins Holy Week of 2022 when, I'm a pastor, I'm married to a pastor. Our kids were on spring break that Holy Week, which is just a disaster as a working parent. And I got the phone call that he'd been taken to the emergency room and things looked very serious. And that was on Monday of Holy Week. So Daryl and I had to make a decision. He said, I said, I think I need to go. And he said, I think you do too. And so the book follows the story of that visit and my grandfather's death and his burial, and also all of the grief that journey uncovered, because like everyone, I was still grieving the pandemic and all of those losses and all of that pain, the deaths in our congregation, the difficulties of being a parent in a pandemic. And so as those layers of grief peel back, the birds are the guides through the book. Each chapter is focused on a different major concept like death and life and love, but also a different bird like vultures, owls, doves, and the lessons that the birds have to teach us as we walk through grief and toward hope.
Obviously, when you're young, like, we're all sort of interested in what the adults in our lives are going on. Did you ever get into birds much with him when you were young, or is that just kind of like a seed planted?
It really was just a seed planted. My grandfather was very into nature. My mom has always been very into nature. So we took a lot of trips when I was a young child to national parks and things like that. And I was always just so frustrated that they would have to peel my fingers off of my Babysitter's Club book or whatever else I was reading. I'm like, do we have to go look at rocks? Do we have to go look at trees? I'm so happy
that
just
was
reading. Why won't you all leave me alone?
Man, on vacation, it's like, I want to relax. I don't want to go to museums or go, like, we're here to, like, vacation's a vacation. Summer vacation or like an actual vacation, it's like, let's relax.
Yes. But that said, I did grow up in the northern woods of Wisconsin. So nature was all around me in a way that it's not for us living now in suburban Southern California. I have to take my kids to nature. We have a little backyard. It's got some feeders. It's got some birds. But I grew up in the forest on the edge of a lake. And so things like fishing and hiking, those were just part of my childhood. But I've learned to appreciate those in a much deeper way in my adulthood. And now I think I'm recovering that sense of wonder that I had as a young child. But then, I turned toward the library lifestyle for a good 20 years.
I love the library lifestyle. Big fan of the library.
Nothing wrong with it.
It's holistic, right? And I also wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned it a few times on the podcast in the past months, like people in your church community, like, you're very public. Obviously, you're one of the pastors, you have a podcast, you're an author. Like, how has you being a birder and a pastor with a public platform, like, how has that shaped and formed relationships in, like, your spiritual community? How has that given you open doors, giving you opportunities with your congregants?
I think because birds are the great unifier, it is such a gentle, wonderful way to interact with the congregation. Probably a third of the emails I get these days are either bird identification, what is this? This was in my yard,
There
or
you go.
I saw this bird on my trip and I wanted to share it with you. And I think so many people are hungry for connections with their pastor, but our folks are so just respectful and gentle and like, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to take up your time, but I saw this bird. And often when I follow up on that email, then it opens up a conversation of what
Yeah.
else is going on with them. You know, it's a gateway for me to be asking some deeper spiritual questions in their lives. But it's just such a sweet thing. You know, people put birding magazines in my mailbox, and I really try to keep birds out of my sermons, but birds
I
are
was got
all
to
over
say,
the
you
Bible.
probably have like nonstop bird analogies in your sermons now.
I mean, I try to keep them out, but if you're preaching Isaiah and you'll mount
Sure.
up on wings like eagles, like you can't not mention the eagle. And Jesus saying, look at the birds. They do not, store away in barns, and your heavenly Father feeds them. So often it's just there in the text. And then always the running joke with the congregation is like, well, there's a bird there. I can't not talk about it. And everyone laughs. And then we go on. And it's such a gentle thing to come together over. And it often opens the doors to deeper conversations. But I read somewhere recently that when you're a woman over 40, I just turned 40 last year, 41, it's really good to tell people about an animal you like so people know how to shop for you, because women over 40 are hard to shop for. So all of my gifts these days are bird related. I mean, all over my desk, I can show you. I've got coasters and I've got pictures, and it's very sweet.
Well, it's like you revert back to like, I feel like a lot of us don't get past the age when we're kids. Like we just had a kid birthday last week and it's like, oh, what is he like? Oh, and you say one or two things and then you get like 5 or 6 different groups of gifts of, oh, that one thing that he likes. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's doesn't change.
Yeah. But people get weirded out if you're over 40 and you say Legos. So it's good to have birds. I
That's
like
true.
Legos too, though.
And I would imagine a lot of the pastors I know, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit with like the pastors having pastors, but I mean, a lot of the pastors who I know would love to have just more relational engagements with the congregants. And a lot of people usually are like, oh, like that's the pastor. I don't want to bother them. Or it's like, it's crisis time. And like you're getting emails, calls at midnight being like, there is a crisis. We need a pastor to help shepherd this crisis versus, hey, like, Courtney, I saw this bird and I thought of you. Like, that's a much like you being open and honest and sharing just your interests and where you are. That gives the people in your community kind of an excuse to reach out to you on.
It does, absolutely. And I love it for that reason. And I love the way some folks in our congregation have gotten into birding, now that I talk about it all the time, and have reported to me that it really has been good for their spiritual life. It's been good for their marriage. Some of them, it's been good getting them outside. I think it is just such a positive practice in so many ways. And so I think it's a good thing to talk about. And it's good for people to know that their spiritual leaders are fully formed people, that, we're not just reading theology all day. And they know my husband's into gardening and loves UCLA sports. And they know I'm into birding because we do other things besides just be here in the church office and visit hospital rooms and things like that. So I think it's healthy all the way around.
You've got several chapters. So a couple things that I'll just say, great little points of this book, around 200 pages and several short chapters. So IVP, I feel like regularly does a good job of putting out like around 200 page books that I feel like I can give to just about anybody. But I love that you can pick this up. Like you could do this this would be a great book club book, a couple of chapters at a time. This would be a great devotional book. But as you were writing and organizing and editing the chapters, I'm curious, what were some of the standout memories for you? What were the most enjoyable chapters to read? What were the most surprising chapters? Like your journey of actually writing it and organizing it. What was that like, and what were some of the standouts for you as the writer now that it's done and locked and kind of ready to ship? And by the time people are hearing this, this will come out just a couple days before publishing date.
Yeah, so people can start getting their hands on it, which is so exciting. The book originally began with the chapter on vultures and death. And my husband
Makes
is always one of
sense.
my early readers. He's a big reader. And he was like, you cannot start the book with death. Like, you need some sort of gentler, kinder, more whimsical intro. And I was like, no, you're right. You're right. What I loved most about writing this book, besides the ways that it allowed me to kind of go back through some childhood memories and reflections on my relationship with my grandfather, I loved doing the deep dives into the different birds and all the research. And I learned so much. And then when the book was almost ready for publication, we had Dale Gentry, who works for the Audubon Society. Because I said,
Oh,
Dale,
okay.
I only know what I know. And I did a ton of research, but I'm sure I missed things. And sure enough, he caught a few things. It's this, not that. And let's move over here. And so the bird facts in the book are good and true and have been verified. But to spend, a month learning about pelicans and spend a month learning about albatrosses and spend a month learning about owls. And it got to the point where my husband, we'd go on a date and he'd say, Courtney, 2 bird facts. You can give me 2 bird facts and I will listen attentively. And then we were moving on. I was like, that's fair. But which 2? I have so many. But the more I learned about just the creativity of God and the diversity of God's creation. And, there are 12 different birds or groups of birds that I cover in this book. And there are 11,000 different species of birds in the world. There is so much still to learn. And for me, I think there's something about hitting midlife where you can kind of hit some doldrums and you can hit some boredom. And for a lot of people, that's where the midlife crisis happens, where you buy the sports car, or you have the affair, or you start behaving badly and melting things down. And I was really at this point in my life where I was looking for wonder again, and to find it in the natural world in a way that I have not even begun to scratch the surface was such joy. So to be able to share that with people and write through that, and know that, I could do this for hundreds of years and not get to the bottom of it was deeply joyful for me.
That's fantastic. So I think you have 14 bird chapters. There's 15 chapters, and the first one is just a general one on birding. What was maybe the most surprising one for you, where you're like, well, I kind of knew that, but that was so invigorating and surprising and educational?
I love the chapter on albatrosses. I've seen one albatross in real life, and it was at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So it was a captive albatross. I've never seen a real one out there in the world, but albatrosses are amazing. They can fly for days on end without resting. They shut down one half of their brain at a time so that they take these micro naps. They have the largest wingspan of any birds. They live the longest of any bird. They mate usually for life. The oldest known bird in the world is a bird named Wisdom the albatross. She nests on Midway Atoll out there in the Pacific Ocean, and she was still laying eggs at age 76. Wow. And it just blew my mind over and over and over again. So the best place to see albatrosses is in Antarctica, which my husband tells me the family budget does not extend to.
Maybe you can see if IVP, if you can do a follow-up book and get like a grant, like a research grant.
But to learn about these bizarre and amazing wild birds, and also, learning deeply about different species of birds also put me in touch with fresh grief, because there are a lot of birds out there that aren't doing well. And albatrosses.
Yeah, that was a big part of the book too. The grief of creation stewardship and just all of the challenges that are natural but accelerated by our active and passive choices as a species, and usually related to greed. It's not just like, oh, we're harming nature because we're ignorant. It's usually we're profiteering and just not really caring about the negative effects of things on the natural order and systems.
Absolutely. And I grew up in kind of this evangelical subculture that had this little tongue-in-cheek, it's all going to burn anyway, so it doesn't matter kind of perspective. And just the grief over seeing what we've done and continue to do to the planet. And, most albatrosses that have been studied in the past 5 years have bellies full of plastic because they can't distinguish between a squid and a floating toothbrush that someone didn't throw away properly. And so to realize that we have a responsibility that's, we can't take on as a crushing weight. Like we talked about before, we're not meant to hold the whole weight of the world, but what small things can we do, and we can do small things like planting native plants, small things like recycling. So, just some of those things that as a child, I was told don't really matter because, it's all going to burn anyway. And realizing and repenting of that, and learning that walking faithfully with the Lord means walking faithfully in terms of how we care for the sparrows as much as we care for ourselves and each other.
My wife was telling me about that. I think it was last year and a half or so ago, and we planted a bunch of native plants like in our side yard, and we've gotten more critters, bees, birds, and we put up a bunch of feeders. I love our hummingbird feeders. Those are just a delight when they're coming by. Some of them are a little skittish, but we have one that literally like doesn't care, and basically like our kitchen, like over the sink, like when I do dishes, sometimes he's just hanging out right there, and I like say, "Hey guy," like, and he's just hanging out right there, eating, hanging out. Like some of them, like you look at them and they fly away, and some of them they're just like, yeah, these are our people. They're putting out food for us.
For sure. And wanting our kids to have that same delight. That's part of it for me when I think about conservation and creation care is I want my kids and my grandkids and my great grandkids to be able to also enjoy the hooded orioles that are coming back here in California this time of year, and the different species of hummingbirds, and wanting to be, it's about stewardship at the end of the day. It's not a crazy liberal agenda. It's about stewardship.
Well, yeah, you mentioned in your book, and this is actually kind of something that not quite an active thought, but more of a passive thought I have, where it's like, yeah, I'll probably get into birding one day. You mentioned that in the book in one of your chapters where you tweeted something to that effect, like, yeah, in the next 10 or 20 years, I'll probably get into that more. And the people who were really into it were like, hey, just let me put a bug in your ear. Some of these species are dying out. So like, if you really want to get the most of it, jump in now, because in 10 years, XYZ species, I mean, hopefully they'll be around, but there's no guarantees.
Yeah, it was pivotal in my starting the birding practice. I was like, okay, well, I might as well, I guess I'll start now then, because it's true. But there is a lot of hope too. Most people know the stories of the bald eagles that came back when we banned DDT in the late 90s, and those stories can happen too. And it wasn't just bald eagles. I learned it was brown pelicans. It was lots of other large raptors. We hear about the bald eagles because they're kind of that national symbol, but it was true of many.
Well, and they're just so like I feel like my oldest, any bird of prey, he's like, it's a bald eagle, or he'll say peregrine falcon because that's one he knows. But like, I'm like, I don't know if that's a bald eagle. I don't know if I feel like there was like, we're not in the birding world quite yet, but I think we got an alert that there actually was one not too far from here. But we do have a lot of hawks and falcons out here in the Midwest.
That is good. It's very hawky country.
Yeah, no, I should get on Merlin and learn more.
It's about free, and there's no in-app purchases, so you can like let your kid run around with it, and you won't get a bill for $87 later. And you there in Kansas City, you're on the great, you're near the Great Mississippi Flyway, which is the biggest migratory path in the spring. So you will see hundreds of thousands of warblers and sparrows and vireos and all these birds come through this time of year. There's actually something you can go to online called Birdcast, and it'll show you how many birds are migrating on a given day. And I did not know this before becoming a birder, but most birds migrate at night. So you can fall asleep at night knowing that there are hundreds of thousands of songbirds flying over your head. And then you wake up the next morning and they all have to eat and they all have to rest. So you might have a bird in your yard for one day that's some rare migrant just coming through. It is magic in the Midwest in April. Absolute magic.
Well, I'll keep an eye out for that. And yeah, no, and I've just developed my own, I feel like, without going, oh, like I want to become a birder. Like there is something very, I don't know if soothing is quite the right word. Like I didn't fully like follow your Lenten practice, like a bird a day or whatever, but like I think about that a lot, especially in the mornings when I have my coffee and I'm trying to either read or go for a walk or whatever. Like, and I notice birds, like there is something very, I don't know, like therapeutic or worshipful. Like there is something transcendent, and I'm not quite sure exactly what that is, but it's undeniable. And like you said, you're agnostic and atheist and friends who have had terrible church experiences, like you learn things in nature, and you experience things that you can't always experience inside a church.
Yeah, it's really true. It's really, really true. And spring is magical for birders. So if you're going to get into it, spring is a really good time for a couple of reasons. One, all the migratory birds are coming back or they're flying through. And two, all the birds are in their breeding plumage. So they are their most vibrant, beautiful, bright colors. In the fall,
Nice.
most of those birds will molt into really kind of drab, dark feathers. They're hard to tell apart from each other and they don't sing as much. And that's the third reason. In the spring, all the birds are looking for spouses. So they are just singing their little hearts out
Showing
and you
off.
can recognize them. Yeah, Merlin helps you ID birds by sight, but it also has a sound ID button. It's like Shazam for birds. So you
That's
can just go into your yard, push sound ID, and it will bring up all the birds
Here
that
are
are
all the
singing,
birds that are, wow.
It's
And
so fun. It's magic.
We don't have a huge backyard, but our backyard, the person on the other side of the fence has like an enormous amount of land, and there's all sorts of animals, birds and otherwise. There's deer, there's rabbits, there's this and that. But I mean, I imagine that when there's a lot of activity, you press that button, probably several of those are popping up. And then you know that they're there and you can maybe kind of look for them. I always thought your stories were funny in the book of you with your binoculars trying to find, like being a little detective, trying to find them.
I think the neighbors think I'm creepy. I need to tell them, like, I'm looking at the birds in your trees. I'm not looking in your windows, because sometimes I like can see myself through someone else's eyes, and I'm like, okay, I need to climb down off the swing set because I'm going to be freaking out the neighbors.
Yeah, with your
but
binoculars.
I think there's a nest up there. I have to find it. Yeah.
Nice. Well, Courtney, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to finishing the book. I do want to know, are you doing the audiobook for it?
As of right now, it hasn't been contracted for audiobook. So we'll see.
IVP,
it could happen later.
Christian Audio, get on it. I enjoyed recently you had your on your podcast, you read the first chapter. That was very enjoyable. So listeners, I will put that in the show notes as well. That was great.
Thank you. I did my own little mini audiobook.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely should do it. Yes, I thought that was good that you said that too, but I think they absolutely should. I mean, I feel like that's a gimme. But anyway, so go buy the book, pre-order the book, or order if you listen to this a couple days later. The book is out in all fine places. Is there a better place to order it?
No, really, wherever it's best for wherever people like to buy their books, they can buy my book. Although I've discovered recently, Amazon is great. IVP, you can order it direct from the publisher. Bookshop.org, which I guess everyone knows about but me, but it's amazing.
Yeah, bookshop.org is usually the hyperlinks that I'll put in the show notes, because like obviously you can get it from Amazon. If we get our Amazon affiliate product link going again, just to get a couple extra bucks in the door, I might start using that. But I think bookshop.org.
And it's
I really like what they do.
20% off right now at Hearts and Minds, I think. Hearts and Minds bookstore. It's 20% off.
Nice. And I will probably reach out to Krista and see if we can get a discount code for Substance listeners as well.
Yeah, do it. Krista's good people.
So the final thing here, we do our one segment, Courtney Substance shout outs. What have you been reading, watching, listening to lately that's been edifying or enjoyable?
Oh, shoot. I've got to look it up so I get the correct name. Hang on. We just finished it. Okay. Daryl and I just finished watching the documentary. It's a 3 or 4 part series called Arctic Ascent with Alex Honnold. So he's the one who did that free climb of the in Yosemite, and he has a rope this time, and he has some friends with him. But he goes into Greenland in part to study some of the melting ice, but also to climb this thing that's never been climbed before. And I won't spoil the ending, but it was really just delightful. And I just finished Tommy Orange's new book, Wandering Stars, which is kind of a sequel.
Is that
kind
fiction?
Of not. Yes, it's a novel.
Okay, not familiar
with
that one.
Yeah, he wrote the book There a couple of years ago. It was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, but he's a Native author and writes a lot about Native peoples.
I bought that from one of my library bookstores, and it's on my shelf. I like whenever I see something that wins the Pulitzer and I find it, I'm like, I've got a little stack for. These seem like they're worth my time when I have time to read fiction.
Yes, it was so good. And I just finished the book, The Birds Audubon Missed, by Ken Kaufman, who's kind of a big deal in the birding world, but it's all about kind of the history around how birds were discovered and how a lot of the folks who named birds, discovered birds, were not very ethical about their practices. They made stuff up. They fought. It was such a fascinating, interesting read, and really, really very charitably written, but very funny as well. We have never been well-behaved people, you know? Never.
That's true. It's been really nice to catch up with you. And I love seeing your platform. I love listening to the podcast, but it was really nice to just get a chance to catch up with you, hear more about the book. I hope everybody picks this up. This is just one that you could genuinely like put like forward facing, like on your bookshelf and just impress the people when they're coming over to your house. This is a great book.
Thank you so much. And we did write a little discussion guide that you can get for free on the IBP website. So if folks do want to read it for a Bible study or for a small group or book club, that is available to folks as well. And I wrote those questions, so they do go with the book.
Well, excellent. This was great, Courtney. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy.
That was so wonderful. I had such a wonderful time. I hope you all enjoyed that too. And if this is one of your earlier ones, the last several episodes we did were a blast. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, our April Fool's episode, we did our unsubstantive cinema. We typically do substantive cinemas where we look at movies with deep, social, transcendent, sometimes spiritual themes that are substantive, like the name. But for our April Fool's Day, we covered the extremely silly Hot Shots Part 2. Did that with my buddy Dale. That was a lot of fun. Right before that, we covered a very substantive movie with Blu-ray 4K YouTube expert Elliot Cohen over in the UK. That was a wonderful time. And I also had a wonderful conversation with Eisner Award and National Book Award, Coretta Scott King Award winning cartoonist and writer Nate Powell. And I'll say my own substantive shout out to echo his. He did get me reading that X-Men series that came out several years ago and is now coming to an end after a very long, elaborate, multi-book run. I've always enjoyed reading comics, but for the last, I don't know, several months, it's not like I'm reading them on a regular basis, but it's really good stuff, and there's a ton of it. So I think you got me back in. I'm very susceptible to our guests' recommendations. And then we also had the return of Trevor for that topic toss-up. What a wonderful time. So those are some of the last few episodes we have. If you haven't checked any of those out recently, check them out. Share them with your friend. That's always the best way to spread the word about the show. If the show is something you like, tell a friend. And if you're able, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/thesubstancepod. We have $3, $5, and $10 a month tiers. It goes to help support the show. And I'll say we also have, if monthly support is not your thing, which is totally fine, we have Cash App at $thesubstancepod. It looks like our current editor, Editor Dave, who we are very, very grateful for, may not be with the show for much longer. And I would love to kind of give him a little bit on the way out, a nice little gift just to kind of say thanks for everything he's done. So if you're able to do that, $thesubstancepod at Cash App, and we appreciate it. Well, that was our show today. And I've been your host, Philip Marinello, and I very much am looking forward to seeing you again next time on The Substance.
Mostly my husband is grateful I have people to talk to about birds, so I don't talk to him about birds all the time. I follow too many Davids.
Brushing short sword drills when I was like 6.
I went to Twitter, which I'm still calling Twitter, the birdiest of the platforms.
Sorry, Dave, cut this out. I got motion sensor lights here for the patrons I can see every now and then. My video just gets super dark in this room. Well, I got my little guy did pop in. I wanted to say hi real quick here, Dave. I will maybe do a little outro here afterwards, but I don't know if you want to use any of this for that, but here you go, Ezra. You want to say hi? I'm going to stand still real quick here.
Hi.
Hi, Ezra. Hi,
so this is Ezra.
It's nice to meet you.
He is the one who thought the pileated woodpecker and the great horned owl and the
Grackle?
The grackle. You talk about grackles a lot. What is a grackle again, bud? Okay. What are some of your favorite animals?
Well, I do love cheetahs.
Cheetahs.
Ooh, those are good ones. They're fast.
Do you know what one of the things Miss Courtney and I talked about were earlier? She says she really likes the Wild Kratts.
Oh, I do too. Mama.
Yeah.
Do you like Chris or Martin better? Do you have a favorite?
You want to
Martin.
pick a book?
Martin. Yeah, Martin's a little bit funnier. I like that about Martin.
Yeah, blue's his favorite color as well, so I think that had
That makes sense.
a large.
I respect it. It's my favorite color too, Ezra. Blue is the best color.
Blue is pretty cool. What do you got there? What's that?
Oh, this is an animal book I just got.
There you go. We're at the library here. So
Oh,
occasionally, if I'm
look
not,
at that.
if it's middle of the day or towards the end of the day before I go home, I use the library free conference rooms. So they popped in
I
to get some
respect
books,
it.
and I was
Ian,
like,
can you say hi?
"Come say hi."
Hi.
This is our newly 3-year-old boy, Leland, and this is my wife Anna.
Whoa,
I
Anna,
can't
so
hear you,
nice
but
to meet you.
Boom.
Hello,
And
nice to
Leland.
meet
I
you.
want to hear.
Hi. He's going to steal it.
Hi, Anna, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I've
Hi,
read
Ezra.
a couple snippets of the book and I love it so far. I can't wait to actually read it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That's super kind.
Read this new book.
Oh, okay. He's going to steal it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah?
Hey, buddy. Yeah.
Can you say hi?
Yeah, Dave,
Leland?
cut all this out. This will be fun for the patrons, I guess.
It's so fun to meet your family. Hi, Kitty.
Say hi.
Nice to
Hi.
meet you.
Without me.
Don't.
Hi.
All right. I'm going to take these wild children away from you.
All right. Love
Wild
you so
Kratts. Take the Wild Kratts.
Yep.
Bye. They could grow up and be the next iteration of the Wild Kratts.